Hi, everyone. I think we're waiting for a few more people to join, but I can start by thanking everyone for taking the time to participate in this conversation. And uh, what we wanted to do today was to have a relatively informal discussion uh, on on um, on Articles 9, 10, and 11 of the proposed negotiating text of the pandemic agreement. The formal uh, uh, identifier for this document is A/INB/7/3. And it's a complicated draft. The whole proposal is 30 pages long. And what we wanted to do was to discuss only part of it. And we'd sort of settle on 9, 10, and 11, which are areas that some of the groups on the call are familiar with. What I'd like to do on this call is to invite different speakers to reflect on their thoughts, and I plan to go through it sequentially, starting with Article 9, going to Article 10, and then going to Article 11. And I was going to call on a couple of people first, and then, but I really want anyone to feel free that they can raise their hand if they feel like I've sort of not paying attention or ignoring, because it's a little hard for me sometimes to see all the messages that are being given. People can also ping through, or Claire, or Ariana to try and get the things to move along. So I think everyone has seen the text, right? We have Ariana. Can you put in the meeting chat a link to the text we're talking about? So the first article that we're going to be talking about, Article 9, is on, let me see what page of that's on. It starts on page 12 of the text. And Claire, do you want to, can you share on your screen page 12 of the text and then scroll it down to Article 9, Research and Development?
Can do.
This article has 4 paragraphs. And we have a couple of people have already indicated they would have some comments to make on this particular. I don't see anything on the screen right now. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm looking at the wrong thing here. Yeah, there we go. If you could go down to page 12. By the way, could you put on in the chat the link to the live? We have YouTube.
YouTube, I will.
We're streaming this live on YouTube. So if you have someone that wants to follow this that is not on the Zoom call, they can also follow it from YouTube, or they can see it later as far as that's concerned. So two of the people indicated they wanted to make some initial comments on Article 9 were Ellen Tahone and Gopa from TWN. And Ellen, I'd like to start with you. I think you wanted to talk about the 4th paragraph in Article 9. Is that correct, Ellen? Do we have Ellen through?
Yeah. Hi, Jamie. Thank you for organizing this. I'm not sure I'm the best person to kick off on Article 9. I just have some sort of more general comments. And some of them relate to the text more broadly, and it's comments that we've made also at the INB sessions where we had the opportunity to speak. Is that the new obligations for parties that are being negotiated and that are being proposed in this text are very light in terms of new duties. So also, and you see that come back in Article 9, research and development, to this end the parties shall promote, and then they don't. There's no the commitments in these articles are not strong enough. So this is more of a general comment. And then on 9.4, I want to draw attention to the fact that the issue of public financing provided for research and development for pandemic countermeasures is a very important part of the incentives to make things happen and to compel those that are the beneficiaries of this financing, and subsequently often the holders of the rights to the innovations that they develop with that financing, to compel the sharing. And I think Article 9.4 in that sense can be much stronger, because this mainly refers to providing information on a number of aspects, including licensing, for example, but it doesn't say if you receive public financing, you will be obliged, or parties will oblige those that receive financing to share the know-how, IP, data, whatever else is necessary to produce the products that are a result of that financing. So in that sense, there's also a link with Article 10D. Again, the term encourage is used, but nowhere is that leverage, and money is strong leverage, used to actually compel the rights holders to do that there where it is necessary, of course. So those were my preliminary comments on Article 9. Thank you.
Jamie, I believe you're muted.
I'll just mention before turning to Gopa to make a comment on Article 9 is that on this paragraph 4, it's a lot of the transparency obligations relating to the contracts that are out there, and we were happy to see that. In our earlier comments on the zero draft, I think we'd wanted the delegates to think of an entirely separate chapter on transparency, because transparency pops up throughout the agreements in different areas, and also to reconcile the transparency obligations in this agreement with those in the WHA resolution that was adopted in 2019 on transparency. That said, I think I was really happy to see this particular thing. I'd like to invite Gopa, who's indicated he might have some comments on Article 9. Gopa, do you want to go ahead and join us now?
Yeah. Thank you. So I thought, and there are two.
By the way, I should introduce Gopa. Is with a TWN, the Third World Network, and he's one of the more active participants in terms of NGOs in this negotiation. Go ahead, Gopa.
Yeah. Thank you, Jenny. So the first comment is that if you read the paragraph 1, it's a very good statement, but there is nothing subsequent in the article to operationalize that chapeau. Though it is not a chapeau, it is a particular it's a separate paragraph, but it's a very good objective, but nothing further in the article to operationalize that paragraph. And second comment is related to if we are talking about R&D, we all discuss these R&D issues in the context of GSPOA in the past. There was a demand from civil society organizations to have some kind of coordination and prioritization of R&D. So this is an important area where when you talk with pandemic, to have such kind of an arrangement. So that's not there. And also prioritization of R&D, which is very important, because to identify this emerging health threat, if there is a mechanism to look at these emerging health threat, and then it can also complement with the idea of prioritizing R&D. So those mechanisms need much more of an at the international level, not at the level of parties. Then it will be much more fragmented. So here, that a role of international coordination or international mechanism to have coordination and prioritization, which is missing. And third, this transparency thing, which Jamie told, it's an good provisions, but the problem is that it is again very much qualified, subject to national laws and considering the extent of public funding. So how much countries are going to implement it, or will they hide behind this qualification, we do not know. So these are the sort of initial comments. To put it much more clearly, there is no mechanism at the international level, so that's an important thing. And I will also, last comment would like to add is that this now it is hanging in a way, R&D, but we need to link it with the these three elements in the treaty: R&D, technology transfer, and sustainable production and even supply. So there should be a linking of all these provisions which are missing now. It's all like a hanging separately. Yeah, let me stop here. Thank you.
Jamie, I see Rachel Crockett from DNDI here. Perhaps she might would like to comment on certain provisions listed in Article 9.
Yeah, can do, if that's all right, Jamie. Okay, good. In which case, I think just general reflections. There's two issues, I think, with Article 9, and one of them is related to process, and the others are related to content. So I think in terms of the process points, I think we have some real concerns about how this article in particular, and I'm sure this is the case in other articles, but this article in particular was developed by the Bureau and the Secretariat, because there are many, so obviously this had an R&D informals co-facilitated by Mexico and Norway. They proposed some very specific language and some very specific proposals to the Bureau based on the hours of discussion that they had as a group in the informals. Because what they saw kind of areas of opportunity, areas of not necessarily convergence and agreement per se, but a willingness to at least negotiate and to begin negotiating. And those provisions that were suggested have not been included. So I think what needs to happen in INB 7 is a push at the beginning from negotiators, member states, and non-state actors or other relevant stakeholders to ask for clarification as to why certain provisions were accepted by the Bureau and certain provisions were not. Because I think in particular Article 9, there are some very, very specific strong provisions that have not been included, and we have not had any kind of rationale or justification as to why the Bureau has made the choices that they have made. So I think that's really the first kind of process question. And I think one example of this is the specific obligation to attach conditions to public funding, as was mentioned before. There was a very specific obligation in the zero draft to attach conditions, access conditions and other conditions to public funding. That was then conflated in the Bureau's text with an obligation on transparency of contract terms in terms of publication of contract terms, which we absolutely support as a separate provision. You need both. You need the transparency of the terms, but you also need the pro-access terms in the first place, because an obligation to publish your terms is not an obligation and does not mean that there will be pro-access conditions attached to that funding in the first place. So we think that is a real, the two have gotten conflated. It was a member state proposal for the transparency aspects in the compilation text, and they both got mixed together. Now that has not been reinstated or separated back out in this negotiating text, despite there being lots of proposals and support, not just from a global south, global north split, as maybe kind of given the impression by some of the Bureau members, this was a provision that was really supported across geographies. So I think a failure, it's one of the only provisions that's in there, like concrete provisions that have been in there to operationalize equity. And there is a strong feeling that if this is not even across negotiators that we've been speaking to and non-state actors, that if this is not even included as a basis to start the negotiations, then you're totally undermining this commitment to equity that we seem to or the negotiators and member states seem to say that they have. So that's, I think, is the kind of process point. I think I've spoken about the point about the content questions about the attachment, the conditions on public financing. I just a couple more things to say on that that's more content related. I think that there is, without this as a provision, it's not one or the other, and I totally support Gopa's point about needing to make sure that there is kind of reach through and coherence between Article 9, 10, 11 and 12 on some of these R&D provisions. But I think it's not one or the other. There needs to be both, and I think, or there needs to be all. And conditionalities is a very, very important aspect of that, because, and one example, otherwise you're going to rely very, very heavily on aspects like the IP waiver, which is again important in Article 11 should remain. But again, it's a very vulnerable provision. It's on its own there, and if you don't have other things to be able to catch the kind of equity obligations throughout, then you're in trouble. In terms of the access and benefit sharing piece, again, that is an incredibly important aspect that needs to be supported and kept in and strengthened. But there are also aspects where in R&D, especially for pandemics, you're not actually going to need to go through an access or a PAB system as it's currently written. There are many aspects of PPR R&D that will fall through the cracks of that system. So you also need to have an ability to have some sort of obligations on those funding and capture that through conditions of public financing. So we can speak more about the conditionalities if there's interest, but I think one other aspect on the R&D article as a whole is that from our perspective, sorry, I should have said DNDi, Drugs for Neglected Diseases Initiative, but we're a not-for-profit R&D organization. It's very, very downstream clinical research heavy at the minute. There's very, very little, actually zero obligations to even encourage early stage collaboration, investment, collaboration, coordination at an earlier level, which is actually where you're going to need it the most for pandemic PPR. So we would like to see there being probably in three, separating that out a little bit so that there's both the early stage obligations plus the more clinical trials obligations as they currently stand. So those are the kind of two main points. There's some others that we can go into if we have time in the discussion, but those are just reflections from us initially. Thank you.
Are there other people who would like to make some comments specifically on Article 9 before we move on to a different part of the text, Article 10? I think, for a lot of people that have looked at the text, they feel that it's lacking in a lot of areas, much in the way of actionable commitments. They have, you should cooperate, strengthen, participate, things like that. There's one hand up. Let's see, it's Lynette.
Hi, everyone. Thank you. Sorry.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Hi, thank you, Chair. I just wanted to say I agree with you. It's a lot of adjectives. I hate them.
Could you introduce yourself? Sorry, Lynette.
Can you hear
some
me?
Of us
You can't
know
hear
you.
me?
No, we can. Some of us know you, but I think others don't. So if you don't mind just introducing yourself, thank you so much.
My name is Lynette and I live in Cape Town. I think that's okay. Also, what is it? I'm a board member on Unitate, but I've been doing like access work for a very long time with a lot of you on the call. So thank you very much for this opportunity. But I also, I mean, I definitely agree with Jamie. There's a lot of adjectives here, and we don't necessarily know the how is going to happen. And this is something that was quite, I think, for a lot of LMIC based organization or developing countries, there are no tools or there are no mechanisms that are ingrained with or ingrained within the topic, within the document that can kind of like lead to that coordination. So we were very worried already that from the start there was not much kind of like open an open space or platform for a lot of developing countries to be in the negotiations. And now we're seeing this treaty as it forms, or this pandemic accord as it forms. It's forming, it looks like TRIPS 2.0, to be honest. And that is my overall takeoff on research and development itself. Is not necessarily only the start, but it's also where we're going to get the capacity for research and development in a lot of LMIC countries that don't have that capacity. Number two, what is the funding landscape going to look like? Whether or not you have countries, for instance, giving a certain percentage of their GDP, even LMICs, towards research and development. This has been done in TB, of course, as an example there. Number three, we just talk about research and development, but we also need to talk about what is this research and development going to lead us to? And I think I do agree with my colleague Rachel that we definitely need the language to be very succinct, given that this is a legally binding document. So those are my few comments. Over. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Lynette. I see Moga. Please go ahead, Moga.
Yeah, thank you. Just three quick points, basically re-emphasizing the language of promote. Okay, so starting is that we started from a low level, and therefore, I mean, there obviously would be compromises, and then you go down. So down from low level, it means we'll have a piece of paper. But I think we have to be to start from a high level. And I do understand what Sam is talking about the US situation and Congress and president and all your complicated political system. But again, we still, because of that, we still have to aim high. And therefore, when we go down, we don't go right down. So I think all the language about promoting and they shall collaborate and cooperate and do this and do that. And there's no do actually. It's all vague language and with qualification in the middle. The other thing is, I totally agree with Rachel about the importance of having some obligations on all countries to invest in R&D. I mean, we know the US invests in R&D hugely, but we all should invest. And because it's going to be a legally binding document, developing countries also have to be obliged to invest in R&D, little as they can, but they still have to. I don't think, as people from developing countries, we should just wait for, like, the US or the Europe or whatever to give us technology and give us this, and we don't do stuff ourselves, like investing in our universities for a start. Some countries do, some don't. So I think that is really important. And then prioritizing, financing collaborative research. We put these issues actually in the very original People Vaccine Alliance document that had, I'm going to look at the link and put it here, which was, we proposed recommendations for INB before they started, before the zero draft. And one of the points on R&D was to prioritize collaborative research. And I would add that we need to real investment in creating regional R&D hubs in developing countries. And of course, the conditionalities as was explained clearly. Thank you.
Do we have any other raised hands for this discussion of article? Matthias from WHO. Matthias, would you happen to have your camera on? If not, but please go ahead. and speak.
Thank you very much, Dhiru, and thanks a lot for convening this meeting. I wasn't involved in drafting this text, so I'm sorry if my colleagues missed some points. I just want to say that, yeah, I wanted to echo what the other speakers have said. It's not yet there. I would say a couple of things are missing. For example, the funding. It's not very specific where the funding should come from, domestic or international funding sources. Also, for example, this question of public-private partnerships to advance R&D is not mentioned. Also, in terms of coordination of research efforts, I think that this could be much more explicit. So, and then I also noticed a big focus on clinical trials, which is important, but I think other areas within R&D should also be addressed more explicitly. Thank you very much. Over to you, Thiru.
Through, if I could just
yes, please.
Ask people to look at the first paragraph. First of all, that was a great contribution from WHO, and we agree with what he said. But if you could look at paragraph 1 in Article 9, I think Rachel said in the chat that she thought it could be improved, but there is this reference to access, collaboration, and access to research through open science approaches for the rapid sharing of information results. I think what Rachel was pointing out is that it sort of stops short of some other areas of open science that people are interested in. Whether or not that's feasible in a negotiation like that, it's hard to know. But Rachel, I think, are you getting to the fact that it doesn't go to things like sharing know-how or anything about sharing IP rights or anything like that, but just goes to like sharing outcomes, things like that?
Yeah, I mean, it should not be watered down from where it is, absolutely, but it does need to be strengthened because it does just limit, as it's currently written, it really limits the research collaboration and access to research just to the sharing of results and information. So it's just a pure transparency obligation, which again, very, very much support. But the only reference to open science in the whole R&D article is about publication and transparency of results effectively. So what about other aspects that are critical, especially in early stage R&D, especially for pandemics, where you're going to have a lot of open collaboration, or you should be having a lot of open collaboration at an early stage to be able to have something that's ready to sit on a shelf for when the next pandemic hits. And we don't know what that pandemic is, so we don't really know what it is that we're searching for, but it needs to be very quickly being able to take it back off that shelf and probably be developed further by somebody that wasn't part of that initial development phase. So there needs to be much more open science approaches for R&D writ large, rather than just limiting it to transparency.
Thank you very much, Rachel. Juan Hu from MSF, you have your hand up on Article 9.
Yeah.
And if you could just introduce yourself briefly for people.
Yeah. Thank you, Jamie, and you for organizing this. I'm Yuan Qiong Hu from Medicine Sans Frontières. So I have a quick, maybe 2 quick points on Article 9, and agree with previous comments also. One is that we think there's lacking of reference or notion about clinical trial ethical consideration. There's overall, when we talk about R&D, there's no reference to medical ethics in terms of protecting patients' rights and ensure post-trial access, which has been kind of very well spread out as an international standard in medical ethics guidelines. Some of those we think will be helpful to be referred in the current draft to give another leverage in terms of issuing access after supporting clinical trial, collaborating clinical trials. The second point is related to 9.4. The condition agree with what Rachel said, but we also think there is some other places in across the draft now has the intention to probably attach condition upon the reception of public funding, such as Article 10.1c, but we can talk about a bit later. So probably, if that is the intention, maybe some reference can be made to link these two articles. Thanks.
I have a question for any of the government delegates that are involved in the negotiation, if they're willing to share. 9.4 has this reference to disclosing the prices of or pricing policies for the end product. And that was, of course, the subject of a resolution at the WHA in 2019. But is this controversial or non-controversial? Because I know that it wasn't always easy to get this information, and during the pandemic, and a lot of countries didn't want to disclose it. So in the talks that you're aware of, is this anything that, like, is this a consensus view, or is this something that's out there that still has opposition? Are any of the country negotiators willing to share on this issue? No, I guess not. Samantha, Rix, you put something in the chat, or did you want to speak on this?
Jamie, piece from the Kenyan Permanent Mission, Peace Matuma has raised her hand, so perhaps she might.
I'm sorry, Peace. Yes, please introduce yourself and give us a reaction.
Thank you, James, and thanks, Steve, also for inviting me. It's great to see colleagues on the call and just discussion. So I think, based on my understanding of this issue, pricing, I've not seen a lot of pushback on countries agreeing to language that I think the transparency resolution that was adopted. I think there hasn't been much pushback on the pricing issue countries committed to. But I think there has been, as Rachel said, a conflation of issues about transparency and to access conditions in INB. I think there has been a pushback and a deliberate, perhaps, misunderstanding of the issues on this. But I think on pricing, countries would not be perhaps opposed to this, because at the end of I think there's a section that talks about confidentiality and contract terms. So they know that they have that leeway to use in their national laws and contract law. Then they would not. But I will look forward to the discussions next week to see how that would be my issue pricing as a agenda.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Are there other people who want to weigh on different parts of Article 9? I mean, I think that we could, in some ways it's difficult because so much of the same issues pop up in different parts of the agreement. I guess we can go to Article 10. Do you concur, Through? And Through, who had asked to speak? Do you want to introduce people that wanted to speak on Article 10?
Sure, Jamie. I believe both Gopa and Yuan had mentioned that they'd be willing to speak on some of these provisions in Article 10 on sustainable production. So yeah, so why don't Yuan, would you want to speak on Article 10? And then I see Rachel, feel free to intervene after.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks. So indeed, we have some very quick comments on Article 10. One is it seems the approach now in the current draft is to try to highlight the production as more a standalone issue, and compared to previous texts which talk about this level of issue together with transfer of technology and know-how. So maybe for better clarity, in our view, is that it may be at some level of revision. It will be good to maintain the mutual supportiveness between 10, 9, and 11, and also 13 in terms of the global supply chain and logistic network, how the production discussion in 10 would help 13. So we see some of the connection reference probably would be helpful. And secondly, it may be helpful to mention somewhere in the strapo the type of, because sometimes when we talk about sustainable protection, it could be interpreted in different ways in terms of whose sustainability is sustainable for who, what type of production, and so on. It may be helpful to mention somewhere to guide this article to reflect that it's important when we talk about sustainability at a global level, ensuring equity. It's a like independent and diversified production. So we think that the independency part is a little bit missing across the text. Secondly, related to some of the clauses, under 10, for instance, as we just mentioned, 10.1c, 10.1d, sorry, it's very interesting notion about manufacturers who receive public funding engaging non-exclusive licensing. And also it's interesting, this subsection mentioned intellectual property, but also mentioned substance, product, technology, know-how, information, and knowledge. So these are the positive part. However, the improvement we think should be, it is already concerns manufacturer receiving public funding. So it should go beyond the encouragement. There should be requirement instead of encouragement, because of the public funding connection here, which we think will be helpful to strengthen this both under Article 10 and make a reference under Article 9, particularly if we revise Article 9.4 to reintroduce the stronger language about the type of conditions that need to be attached and the transparency of those conditions. So the type of conditions should include this meaning, requirement of non-exclusive licensing, transfer of technology know-how, and the information. So also we think it's very good notion under 10.3 in terms of publication of the terms of licensing and technology transfer agreement. However, again, the type of obligation need to be strengthened, because here it's only promote. So for us, it'd be important to highlight those kind of terms and conditions in licensing and technology transfer agreement should be published as a mandatory requirement, particularly if it involves the emergency situation or involves the public funding. So those shouldn't be just promote. There's no reason like we should repeat again, because we know those agreements are very important. Not only important for the sake of diversified production, but also the publication of terms and of the licensing and technology agreement would have also a concrete impact on the implementation of Article 13 when it comes to supply chain and logistics. Thanks. I'll stop here.
So, do you mind if I offer a quick
Go ahead.
point?
Yes.
On Article 10, paragraph 1D, it has this. I mean, one of the issues that a lot of people have, and we have with Article 10, there's a lot of strengthen, encourage, support. You know, the things are helpful in the sense that it describes an intention and a mandate, but not in a very, they're not very binding. But one point I wanted to mention on Article 10.1d is that, you see this term, mutually agreed upon terms. I would rather that D referred to, like in B, they talk about member states should, or the parties of the treaty should take measures to do things. And I think that they should, instead of encouraging people to do things, taking measures to do things is a stronger way of expressing this. Now, mutually agreed upon terms, when it pops up in the text, it shows up in different places. Sometimes you have to be careful. It doesn't imply that you can't take more coercive measures to get things done. If you look, for example, at the EU proposed regulations on emergencies, they very clearly have in that the authority to take measures to compel people to share IP, to share know-how, to share everything. Ariana, do you mind putting into the chat the relevant part and cite to the EU agreement that refers to the extent that the EU in its own domestic regulation is willing to compel the sharing of know-how among other things. And so I want to flag that the references to, if you want to encourage people, it's fine. We encourage people to take voluntary measures. We encourage people to license things. I mean, CTAP was designed to voluntarily license know-how and everything else, but also it wasn't very successful. So having a wider toolkit, very similar to what the EU is doing in its own domestic legislation. Ariana, were you able to get that in the chat?
I'm looking for it and I'll add it in the chat.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, Sarah, right now, right? Focus. Was this the prepared and response? No, that's not it. No, you haven't found it yet?
I'm just getting it up. My Wi-Fi is a bit slow because of the Zoom running in the background.
Okay, so anyway, I think people understand the basic point, right? Is that should there be something in the agreement that is stronger than encouraging entities on mutual agreed upon terms to do things, particularly in an emergency situation? And the U.S. used the Defense Production Act. They used that to change contracts. They used it in a very coercive way. And the EU is proposing very, very strong measures. Were you able to get that in the chat, Ariana?
Yes.
Okay,
and
thank you.
Olga provided some.
Actually, and I see in the discussion on the right, Olga and Ellen have raised, some of these issues. I was wondering, Olga or Ellen, would you like to come in on this? And also, previously, I saw that Christine McNabb also had some comments. So, Olga, Ellen, or Christine, would you like to come in on this specific article in terms of what you've shared in the chat? Thank you.
Yeah, I was actually going to make some comments on Article 11 with regard to compelling access to know-how and trade secrets, but I put in the chat a link to a really great blog that Olga Gorgula wrote, which we published on our website on this subject in relation to what Jamie just mentioned, how the European Commission is proposing to deal with that in the proposed EU regulation for EU-wide compulsory licensing. But more general on Article 10, I agree with what others have said. Here's an opportunity to have somewhat stronger language than encourage. Sort of declarations of good intent, particularly when governments are spending public money then they could require, and that is a term that I would like to see in the agreement. So 10D would start with, shall require entities, including or especially those that have received public financing. Over.
Thank you, Ellen. Would Olga or Christine want to intervene on this article?
Thank you, Theo. Just very brief comment as a follow-up of what Ellen said and what I wrote in the chat. I completely agree. I mean, we need to encourage private companies that invested their own money into research and development. Or we can encourage, but we need to compel and force those companies that use public funding to develop pandemic technologies. So the public funding, and this has been said already in relation to research and development, must be contingent on providing finances to these companies, and there must be a specific provision in the agreement with those companies that they will they promise or they take the obligation to share the technologies in the pandemic or emergency circumstances. So this language that is currently in Article 10 in terms of sustainable production is not enough. It's not workable in terms of, especially in terms of public funding.
Thank you. Jamie, your hand is up.
Oh, I'll lower the hand. I think I was able to find the text I was looking at. I will quote a few things from it, though. It says, where appropriate, the Commission shall obligate the right owners to disclose trade secrets. This will come up in the next section as well, which are strictly necessary in order to achieve the purpose of the union compulsory license. Indeed, and then they go on and on about that. But some of this language could be considered for part of the treaty thing. Like if you say that where appropriate, you should oblige the right owners to disclose. I mean, that approach could be part of this article. And maybe we should be focusing a bit more on Article 11, where a lot of this conversation really takes place in the text. But I think from a point of view of negotiators, you should really be asking the European negotiators, why don't we take some of the approaches in your proposed regulation on emergencies and see how they fit in the treaty, and why would that be a problem? In other words, if you support it for the European Union, why would it be bad for this agreement?
I think that's a great framing, Jamie, for these discussion. Gopa, you have your hand up?
Yep. So I thought just sort of background, this article was not there in the initial draft. So this has actually appeared in part of these provisions were there here and there, but not under the title called sustainable production. So the developing countries basically push for it, but it was in the context of Article now 13 in the production and supply chain and logistics. So in that context, actually, this discussion took place, and the demand was that it should not be only supply chain and logistics, but production also should be there. Without production, it is difficult to move forward. But now it is split into two. There is Article 10 and Article 13, and this chapeau, the paragraph 1 clearly says the need for the diversified production, and one of the proposed provision is that to have dedicated or designated, not dedicated but designated facilities at the national and regional level. This was one of the demand. But here again, the problem is that every party can designate, but what happens if there is no access to the technologies? So therefore, it is important to link it somewhere. And another a positive thing is that there is there is a provision for actively support and participate in various WHO technology measures. Again, this is like a good element, but it's not going to deliver until and unless make it mandatory. And also the demand from the civil society organizations also initially was that there should be some kind of mandatory tech transfer of publicly funded R&D outcomes. So if they don't have to transfer to everybody, at least to the WHO, and from there, as and when it is required, it can be transferred to the designated facilities. So that part is really missing. But here also one problematic provision I would like to focus here is the paragraph 1C, which states strengthen coordination with relevant international organizations, including United Nations, nations agencies, uh, on issues related to public health, intellectual property, and trade, including the timely matching of supply to demand and mapping manufacturing capacities and demand. So here, this can be interpreted as a cooperation to mandate for to cooperate with the WIPO and WTO. So the WIPO here can be a problematic proposition. So we need to be careful about it, because um, you know I don't have to explain how WIPO works and how there is a conflict of interest on this issue. And similarly, on paragraph D, everything is basically qualified. It is mutually agreed terms and also encouragement. There is nothing on publicly funded, accessing the publicly funded R&D. Basically the state, is is being rescued from undertaking such responsibilities or obligations. So paragraph 3, it is all best and over clauses. There is nothing concrete there, and it's also can conflict the strategies that promotion of voluntary licenses. So far, the history of voluntary licenses is that middle income countries have been left out. So these are some of the comments. And when it comes to the trade secret, there could be two ways of addressing it. One area is that instead of putting an obligation on parties to take measures to force the trade secret owner to owner of the trade secret to share it, it is better to put an obligation on the regulatory agencies to share the regulatory dossiers, which contains uh, most of the trade secrets. Uh, so therefore, there is a need to shift the focus to the regulatory agencies. They do have this trade. They do have the trade secret, of course. Then it is secondary in a way to have provisions in our national laws to compel the trade secret owner, because in many common law countries we do not have statute for trade secret. So it is always easy also to compel the regulatory agencies rather than the manufacturers to share the trade secret. Thanks.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Gopa. And Jamie, you wanted to go on 10.1D?
Yeah, I wanted to. One thing I wanted to go back on Article 10.1D is there's a reference to royalty-free licenses to manufacturers, and I think this is well-meaning. They think free is a good thing, but I think it's a mistake to insist that the license be royalty-free. The medicines patent pool generally has royalty-bearing licenses, and I think royalty-bearing licenses are a good idea. I think it makes it easier to get licenses from universities and individual inventors and some and companies as well. And I think it sort of, if it's always royalty free, it sort of sounds a bit like a welfare program. And so I think it's counterproductive to insist that the licenses, the CTAP licenses themselves don't have to be royalty free. They can be royalty bearing. They can be either way. So if you want to keep royalty free in there, I think what you should say is either free or available on a reasonable royalty or something like that. Use a term that maybe, puts if you have a, if you have some kind of a FRAND option in there, I think it's better than having only a free option. I don't know if other people agree with that or not, but that's certainly my position.
I agree. It's more sustainable, to be honest.
Thanks, Jamie.
And as you say, it's like if it's royalty free, it's a charity, and we're not talking about charity.
Do we have any more takers, so to speak, for Article 10 on sustainable production? If not, I think we could move to Article 11, if you agree, Jamie.
Yeah, I think let's go to 11.
Yeah, Claire, do you mind? Yeah, thanks. If you could go shift down to Article 11, please. So I believe we had a number of, as with the previous articles, we had some interested persons in discussing this. I know Jamie Love, Alan Tehun, Olga Gurgula, and Yuan from MSF. Olga, you have your hand up, so please go ahead.
I'm happy if Alan starts.
I leave that.
Alan, do you want to go first?
I can if the chair agrees.
Yes, Ellen.
Okay. I'll be quick. But well, a couple of comments. First of all, the text currently does not mention CTAP or a successor of CTAP. CTAP, of course, stands for COVID-19 Technology Access Pool, but it might actually be advisable for this agreement to establish a permanent function for health crisis technology. So I would recommend a provision that says the health crisis technology access pool, or whatever name the CTAP successor should get, is hereby established and will replace CTAP, and parties commit to supporting, including financially supporting its operations. I think it will help to have an entity whose role it is to ensure that technologies, the know-how, the IP that are necessary to produce and make them available is shared. But it could also function as a sort of a clearinghouse or a safe place for sharing certain bits of information that you may not necessarily want to post on an open website. So it can have various functions, but today there are sort of veiled references to mechanisms to be possibly established, something like that. But I think it would be good to just cut through the chase and say, we need a successor to CTAP, and it needs to be supported and well funded. So that is my first point. The second point, well, we've actually discussed that also in relation to the previous articles, but again here the term incentivize manufacturers to transfer the relevant technology and know-how, and here again the opportunity to link that incentivizing to public financing, and which is a very important incentive, and link that to the requirement, as Olga pointed out earlier, would be important. Then under C, I just want to point out, and this may be just a drafting thing, but the parties shall make use of the flexibilities. That, of course, well, that is, it's important that they can do that when needed. It may not always be necessary. Further, in that article, it singles out a number of articles of the TRIPS agreement, but not all articles that are relevant in this context. So I would recommend to either not single out specific articles or have a complete list, in which case Article 44.2, Article 73C3 should certainly be mentioned in this provision. And then last, under 3, which has the chapeau during pandemic. So that is in a sort of most urgent situation. 3C is about trade secrets. It reads, encourage manufacturers within its jurisdiction to share undisclosed information as defined in Article 39.2, blah, 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 etc. Well, you can read it for yourself. I think that is a very important article, but it needs to be strengthened to deal with a couple of issues. First of all, encourage is not strong enough. Here is a situation where you're at the height of the crisis. You need access to trade secrets. In that situation, the entities holding those secrets should be compelled to hand them over, along the lines of, as Jamie also pointed out, the European Commission is proposing in its regulation for the EU compulsory licensing for crisis situations. So that possibility to compelling it would be a very important one. Second, you need to have the agreement between countries about this, because this needs to work cross-border. If this doesn't work cross-border, then only large, wealthy countries can, within its own borders, make use of it, as the US, for example, has done, the UK to a certain extent. So those two issues need to be addressed. Using work of several scholars actually in this call, Olga and Jos Sarnoff, we've produced a briefing document with a proposed text that would deal with those issues. So I'll put that in the chat as soon as I stop talking. And then under 4. Again, here are opportunities to tighten the text. There's taking steps, shall take steps. Why not just take that out and say shall with a view to blah, blah, not interfere with the full use of the TRIPS flexibilities. You don't need all these other fluffy words that make it weaker than it should be. So these are my comments. Over to you, James.
Thanks, Ellen, for you gave many thoughts to reflect on, including, for example, through all the provisions, including 39.3 C, but also I liked what you mentioned earlier about not having, let's say, veiled references to CTAP or whatever its successor will be, and also definitely in relation to what is now Article 11.2 in the references to the various TRIPS articles, not to have a closed, seemingly closed list, only referencing, for example, here Article 27, 30, and 31, but having an open list. I see many hands, including Yuan, Rachel, and also earlier, Olga, I believe you were next in the queue, and Jamie, you also mentioned in the chat, your hand is up, but you also mentioned the fact that the mutually agreed terms are inconsistent with, for example, the EU proposed regulation or what the US did in the Defense Production Act. So I would say, let's say in terms of the queue, Olga, Jamie, Rachel, and Yuan. Thank you.
Thank you, Theo. I completely agree with Ellen, and I'm going to comment only on Article 11.3c. This is a good first step in terms of technology transfer in the circumstances when pharmaceutical companies do not want to share their technologies with other companies. And as we all know, while we have a specific mechanism of compelling to share technologies protected by patents in the in IP law, we also know that such complex technologies as vaccines or biological medicines, they are protected not only by patents but also by trade secrets. And so we don't have this mechanism, specific mechanism in the law to force when needed to force pharma companies to share their trade secrets. And so this is a good first step in terms of developing this this mechanism, because otherwise, without this tool, the flexibilities in the TRIPS agreement are just empty provisions, because we can't transfer technology, compel the transfer of technology. But looking at the language of Article 11.3c, absolutely agree with Alan. It says that countries should encourage technology transfer. What is then the difference between encouragement of technology transfer in Article 11.3c and encouraging of voluntary transfer? So it's essentially the same. Right, so the language, as Jamie pointed out, should be stronger, and I agree that it would be good to follow the example of the European Union. What I'm thinking here is that while the European Union is now developing their own mechanism of compulsory licensing and supplementing compulsory licensing of patents with a compulsory licensing of trade secrets where necessary, would that be a problem for a country that doesn't have a national mechanism of compelling trade secrets in their law? So essentially, when there is this necessity to compel someone and the country is willing to do that, there is no mechanism in their national law to do that. So maybe what needs to be done is also to advise, or whatever the language should be, advise signatory states to also implement specific procedures in order to enable this sharing of technology, compulsory sharing of technology in their national law. And the last thing that I want to mention is something that Gopa said in terms of who should be the focus of compulsory technology transfer, either the company or potentially the marketing authorization bodies. We've, with my colleague Luke McDonagh, we were analyzing this potential possibility, and I'm happy to share the report in the chat later, forcing or asking the marketing authorization body to share their information that they hold in terms of marketing authorization or of a specific medicine. We fear that the information that is in the dossier may not be enough, especially in relation to the process of manufacturing, so that the generic company could use this information and produce a generic medicine. Because as it stands now, the law does not specify how specific information on the process of manufacture should be. So maybe forcing the pharmaceutical companies to share their manufacturing procedures, know-how that are relevant as well, because it's not only in the technical side, it's also the knowledge that people have, and I think that European Commission and European Parliament now, with the comment that they presented to the the European Commission's proposal, exactly proposing this, that all the necessary information that is required to produce a product, a medical product, should be shared, not only the information that is shared with the marketing authorization body. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Olga. Jamie, over to you. Then we'll have Rachel, and then Yuan, and then Gopa. But first, over to you, Jamie.
Thank you. I'm going to talk initially on the paragraph that refers to the TRIPS, as well as the discussion of the waiver. Now, on paragraph, pull up the exact number on paragraph 2C of paragraph 11 of 11. Make sure I'm the right one here. There's a reference, and Ellen has talked about this, and I just want to really make sure people understand our concerns about this. It looks good. Like if you look at 2C in the draft, it says Article 11 2C. It says parties shall make use of the flexibilities, including those recognized in the Doha Declaration. The list, Article 27, 30, 31, and 31 bis, they're good flexibilities. We're all and fully respect the use thereof by others. The U.S. during the pandemic primarily used a different part of the TRIPS. They primarily used the limitation on remedies to enforce rights. They primarily used in Part 3 of the TRIPS, Article 44. In some cases, countries may want to use the security exception, which the South Center had recommended people use during the pandemic in Article 73. Article 6 on the exhaustion of rights is another important flexibility in the TRIPS. It's up in Part 1 of the TRIPS, and there are in Article 39 is not even mentioned here, even though there exists a significant flexibilities in Article 39 of the TRIPS when public health is involved. And Article 40 of the TRIPS has to do with the control of anti-competitive practices. The reason I mention these things is that you don't really have to, it's not really helpful to single out these 4 articles. But particularly ones that, like Article 31 bis, which is considered to be really kind of a sore point in a controversy. It was the subject of a whole, multi-year negotiation in the WTO as to how to kind of come up with something that was easier to use than 31 bis in the context of the COVID pandemic. So what I put in the chat is language that we would rather see. And the other thing I want to mention on the waiver is I think the waiver language really creates a problem for negotiators. I think that a lot of times wasted on that. The language sounds pretty good on the waiver if you think about it. It says it's in 3B that well, there's a couple references to the in 3. There's 3A and there's 3B, but in 3A, which is the countries would commit to agree within a framework of time-bound waivers. In a lot of cases, you don't really need a waiver of intellectual property rights, and it's really impossible to do in a lot of countries to just waive the intellectual property rights. What you need to do is to have measures to use regular limitations and exceptions. I mean, you have to, you might be able to use an exception that's in existing law, or issue a compulsory license or something like that on these things. And you're just finding an unnecessarily complicated thing. It'll really make it impossible if you have a requirement to waive intellectual property rights to get this thing confirmed in a lot of countries. It's just, I don't think there's any really huge upside to this. And so the language that we proposed was, in the event of a pandemic, parties will apply the use of the exceptions in the law that are necessary to enable the necessary research activities, scaling of manufacturing, sharing of manufacturing technology, and distribution of countermeasures in a manner consistent with the objectives of the agreement. There's a bit more to the text, but those are the things. Is you should be an obligation to use the measures that are in your law that are consistent with achieving the objectives of the agreement. And it's going to depend. Like there'll be some cases, like in where scaling the manufacturer is not a big deal. Like in the Ebola breakout, we didn't get to the point where capacity was really a huge issue. In COVID, we did. And so what you have to do will depend on facts on the ground. And the other thing we wanted to see added was some countries don't have sufficient amount of exceptions in the law. So, you'd have to review and modify your domestic laws to ensure there are sufficient exceptions to exclusive rights to intellectual property in order to respond to a pandemic. So what you'd want is an obligation to have sufficient exceptions to do what you needed to do, and an obligation to do what you need to use those exceptions consistent with the objectives of the treaty. Now, I think that's a more ratifiable obligation. I think it should have less resistance, and I think it's actually more useful. The Marrakesh Treaty for the Blind was similar. The Marrakesh Treaty for the Blind did not ask you to waive intellectual property rights. It required you to adopt the exceptions which are necessary to do what the treaty wanted you to do for blind people, and you were mandated to use the exceptions. So in the Marrakesh Treaty for the Blind, you had to use the exceptions. They were mandatory. So I think some delegations in the North have been more interested in something more aligned to the Marrakesh Treaty for the Blind approach than something uses a red flag and just calls it a waiver. Anyway, we'd like people to consider, instead of calling for a waiver or something vague like use all TRIPS flexibilities, which nobody even knows what that means, or having a closed list, to have something that's sort of more consistent with what you're trying to achieve and proportionate to what you're trying to accomplish. And I'll stop there.
Thanks, Jamie. And I think, yes, it's also it's a good thing, I think, especially for some of us, some of you who might not have followed the Marrakesh Treaty for the Blind. I think that's could be quite helpful to this process. And in a second or two, I'll provide some of our remarks on this that we've made in relation to the INB. Next on the list, because we still have some hands, I give the floor to Rachel, to be followed by Yuan, and then Gopa, and then I see Ellen. So Rachel, over to you.
Thank you. I just have one quick point, which is about so it's 11.2b. So this provision about making available non-exclusive licensing of government-owned technologies. I think on initial reading, this seems like a very, very important provision. I think it still is. There's just a couple of things that need to either be clarified within this provision itself, or an additional provision be put in to make full use of this, because when it says government-owned technologies, unless there is another obligation somewhere else to ensure that governments actually own the technologies, then you or be able to retain the rights to be able to own the technologies if needed during a pandemic or some other trigger. You're actually left with a very limited amount of technologies that you're talking about for this provision, because it's not automatic and it's not obvious, and not very many government funders do own these technologies. So I think we need to either shift this language to kind of being government funded technologies, for example, or have a separate provision somewhere else that says that that funders, government funders, need to be able to retain the rights to be able to, for example, non-exclusive license at another time. So I think it's a quick point, it's a simple point, it's a good provision, but it's very limited if it's not either expanded or an additional obligation somewhere else, which could be dealt with if you reinstated the conditionalities in Article 9.
Thank you, Rachel. Over to you, Yuan.
Thank you, Thiru and Jim. Yeah, so our comments on 11 are the following. There was some interesting notion, but it needs to be strengthened altogether. For instance, starting from the chapter text 11.1, pooling knowledge and intellectual property are important, but we think if the spirit started from Article 9 and some elements under 10, as we discussed earlier, it should go beyond only just based on mutually agreed terms. It doesn't work sufficiently, as we know. 11.2, the good point for 11.2c is it's recognizing parties shall make use of flexibilities. We think it is a good direction, making this a more explicit positive responsibility for government. However, we kind of return our previous comments to see it would be nice to keep this open, to keep the 11.2c open without a list of provisions and trips. If keep it open, because some of the other clauses and the trip statements may be relevant and not listed here. So it may not be necessary to exhaust all kinds of provisions needed here, but just keep it open to say the parties shall make use of full flexibilities, legal flexibility, policy flexibilities without mentioning trips, because we think it is not a negotiation to make TRIPS agreements better or what. So the objective of the negotiation is to uphold WHO constitution, which is for the protection of the right to health. So we don't have to restrict the clause in TRIPS framework per se. So comment is keep it open, but it's good language. Parties shall make use, which we think is similar to a little bit the Marrakesh treaty approach Jamie mentioned, well as using exceptions becomes a positive responsibility for the achievement of the objective of the treaty. So we think this should be the same here. And we also welcome the language about fully respect the use thereof by others. This is quite good, because it's kind of upholds kind of political recognition. Not only every country should use, they should have the flexibility, but then they should use it and also respect the others to use. And then we have one comment also on 11.4. We think it's a good notion here as well, because TRIPS type provisions in the bilateral agreement are still a very concerned issue. So this is a good notion to have this issue tackled under this treaty, because we couldn't find under the existing international law, there's nothing in WTO framework, nothing in any other legal framework to introduce this kind of obligation. So we think this is very good, but the language can be strengthened because now it says take steps so that negotiated provisions do not interfere. We think a stronger obligation could be directly oblige the government not to introduce this provision in the negotiation to start with, so that we don't have to spend time on that. Just stay with the flexibility, don't introduce at the starting point. And also, if possible, we also welcome any language for the government to review existing clauses. So if there's something that has already been agreed in the FTA and the BEAD agreement for the purpose of implementing the treaty, which is upholding right to health, access to medicines, it would be nice for government some language to request or the government or encourage the government to review existing provisions and consider revising, suspend, or waive some of the TRIPS Plus obligation that they have already agreed upon. So these are our comments. And then, sorry, backtrack to 11.3a. 3a is a welcomed notion. So, I mean, in terms of the waivers, so we think it's good if it's still there, but we think the language should be stronger, because if a government taking the lessons learned from COVID, one of the problems is that if parties only come to agree on the necessity to have a waiver, and then we're back to day one in COVID. If the waiver is as one of the options are still desirable, I mean, because the A is under 11.3, which is during pandemic. So if parties only commit to agree on the necessary of the waiver, then we of the time. So we hope that something needs to be agreed upon earlier, and then during pandemic, everything needs to come up in effect very quickly, and should be institute waivers altogether. And we also welcome 11.3c, the mentioning of the undisclosed information, and agree with the comments made by Ellen and Olga. It should be made stronger, but at least the notion is here, but it has to be be stronger. Goes beyond the encouragement only. Thanks.
Thank you, Yuan, for your substantive comments from perspective. Now we move on to Gopa from TWN, and then Ellen Tehun. Gopa?
Thank you, Thiru. The first comment is related to this. This transfer of technology article needs to be linked with the R&D, right? As I told, it's kind of hanging right now. If there is an R&D, it's based on certain principles that should percolate even to tech transfer. And second, as in the case of R&D article, here also, there is no explicit mention of or in the case of sustainable development, there is no international coordination mechanism to realize that. Say, for example, in the case of sustainable production, you can have these, designated facilities, etc. But if there is no mechanism to ensure access to technologies, to those facilities, it will be good to look on print, but nothing will be changed. So here, even on tech transfer, it say that a conference of parties will work later on. It's like not saying that like a CTAP, which is an existing mechanism, right? You can change the name and make it as a pandemic technology pool or something, right? So there is no mention of it. It is important to establish such a mechanism and clearly. So here, this will, even after 20 years, it may not get established. So the current, as per the current language. And the third point is that if you read Article 11 2b, it talks about make available non-exclusive license of government. Party shall make available non-exclusive license of government-owned technologies on mutually agreed terms as appropriate for the development and manufacturing of pandemic-related technology, and publish the terms of this license. In a way, you can say when it comes to the COVID, US fulfilled part of this obligation by giving license to Moderna or even to Pfizer in a way, because it's a publicly owned technology. What they have not done is that they have not put the conditions in public. So what we require is that diversified production. Then there should be a special provision to transfer these publicly owned technologies to the manufacturers in developing countries too. So it's not mentioned here. It's a very generic obligation. So US in a way have fulfills part of these obligations. I think it is important to mention developing countries. And the next point is that the whole approach of this article is, for the technology transfer is, based on the a notion of, hand to end to end technology transfer. So this is not the way that things are working always. There are alternative ways to work. For example, there are existing capacities in different parts of the world, including in developing countries. They do have the abilities to reverse engineer some of it, or produce certain part of the products, but they do need, often they hit on the regulatory barrier. There you need information to critical information. So these requirement of information varies from small molecule to biologics. So I'll come to the biologics and dossiers as soon. But here, when it comes to give an example of Paxlovid, developing countries manufacturers also develop Paxlovid within 4 to 6 weeks from the announcement of Pfizer. But some of the regulatory agencies in developing countries require bioequivalency and bioavailability studies. That's on a comparable basis. So you didn't get the originator's product to carry out the BABE studies, but the BABE studies information is with the regulatory agencies of developed countries. They could have shared the BABE of the originator. That data is good enough, then you can do away with the comparative trials and you can go ahead with the generic BABE studies. So this kind of
What's that acronym? Can you, just for some of us who might know?
Bioequivalency studies.
Yes, good.
Right. So this could have been done. So this kind of provisions are required. So now let me come to this regulatory dossier issue. So as far as the small molecules are concerned, process is not the product. That means you can have any kind of process, but the regulatory agency will look at finally what you are producing is the same product or already approved product, or is there is an originator's product or not. If there is an originator product, already approved product, then the small molecule manufacturer do not have the burden of proving safety and efficacy. So you don't really require the access, but some kind of problems can create it, like BAB, which is not actually required, which is required only for those drugs which have the solubility issues. But sometimes the push for the higher standards, many developing countries are undertaken the compulsory BAB study. So that created this problem. But Bangladesh companies produced Paxlovid without any BAB studies, and nobody died there actually using that. But now coming to the biologics is the issue where the process is the product. That means if there is a deviation from the originator's manufacturing process, then there is a burden of proving safety and efficacy. But the science now, there are more and more evidence that the process is point of departure, regulatory point of departure of process is the product does not hold good anymore. You can have various process, but you can get a quality product without compromising safety and efficacy. So the big example is the reforms carried out in the biosimilar regulations. Biosimilar regulation does not hold that concept anymore. You don't need comparable trials. There is no burden of proof of safety and efficacy, provided you can characterize the molecule well. And the technology for characterization has improved a lot. So therefore, um, uh, you can bypass the trade secret barrier in two ways. One is, you do the reforms based on the science and technology, evidence, and you can bypass the regulatory, the trade secret challenges, as did it in the case of biosimilars. But when it comes to sharing of dossiers, of course, there is a point that the dossiers may not contain all the informations required for the production. That is in the case of regulatory dossiers in the developing countries. But the regulatory dossiers in the developed countries, it's like submitting to US or Europe, contain substantial information. So you don't need line by line copying of all the things. There are capacities existing, so you need that certain critical information to fill the gaps. So therefore, the sharing of dossiers is an important thing. It can actually move quite a bit uh, uh, when it comes to fill the technology gaps. But that is not mentioned here. And one more issue we would like to point out here is that there should be an international mechanism wherein which whenever there is a biological materials are involved, like certain products you need cell lines, certain products there are eggs. So there should be a internationally bank, a biological material bank, where in which pandemic related products, biomaterial should be deposited, like value added things, like the cell lines, a modified cell lines, or X for the vaccines. So WHO can keep that. If there is a production scale up is required, they can give to potential manufacturers. So that part also missing. So these are a few comments. I'm saying that we need to really look into the various products and requirements, even on vaccines. Also, the platform to platform, the regulatory dossiers requirement can change, but these kind of access to information, access to starting materials can really make a change. So let me stop.
Thank you, Gopal. Thanks for your extensive comments. I see we have a comment from, or a question from Preeti Patnaik from Geneva Health Files. Over to you, Preeti.
Hi, good evening. Thanks for organizing this and letting media be a part of this to listen in. I had actually two questions for experts here, three actually. One is, our sense of reporting on these negotiations. It appears there's a lot of, strong resistance to codify obligatory language on tech transfer. So when confronted with, the dynamics as they are prevailing, what is what is potentially the legal formulation of obliging tech transfer? I mean, yes, we have discussed for the last hour and a half on this, but what will be the way out in terms of getting countries to accept obligatory language? And the second one is, I understand that we are not discussing, as indicated, that we're not discussing Article 13 today, but co-facilitators, Pakistan and Indonesia, had submitted a proposal that linked Article 10 and Article 13. And I think TWN kind of touched upon this in their earlier intervention. I wonder if some of the experts here can draw a link between production and supply chain. We have not had a chance to look at this proposal by co-facilitators, but maybe others here can comment on that. Basically, how to link this, and there were also efforts to sort of set aside procurement from these commitments. And finally, on the limitations of having language on waiver in a pandemic accord. yes, there are difficulties in implementing this at the national level, as some of you have raised. But what would be the legal effect of having language on waivers in a pandemic accord? And I think MSF had suggested previously that there could be certain interpretative tools that can help WHO member states to actually push the boundaries on using waivers. Thanks so much.
Sorry, you mind if I
Go ahead.
First, just on the last point on the waivers, I don't think you can negotiate all you want on getting better interpretation of what kind of flexibility you have, but the countries have plenty of flexibility they don't use. And I mean, the U.S. had dozens of compulsory licenses during COVID. Nobody even mentioned it really. I mean, it barely gets mentioned in the TRIPS Council, and they did it by putting like 5 or 6 words in a contract. I mean, it was really easy for them to do. And I think what happens if you sort of go to Geneva and you want to negotiate TRIPS language all the time, you just use up a lot of your chits, and I'm not sure it's a very good use of your political capital. I think these other issues about concrete agreements on terms and conditions on government-funded research and things like that are probably more important to be focused on these discussions. I had a couple. One thing I think Article 13 is really important. I think it should be like a separate discussion because it seems to be where a lot of the action is in terms of this agreement. And I don't think we really have to wind this call up, I think, pretty soon. So I think we'll have to just delay that. But in terms of like what you can do to compel people, I think at a certain point you can use the compelling language, but you should also think about the incentives, which are either there or not there in terms of getting people to share things. Not everything can be a gun to your head. I mean, there have to be some things that are actually make it, and it doesn't have to be always in the interest of a company. It can be in the interest of a government. So at this point, we're just kind of reacting to Articles 9, 10, and 11 of the text and not talking about other things like the benefit sharing thing or the Article 13 or proposals for voluntary pooling mechanisms and things like that. We need to talk about those things. We just can't really do everything today. But I mean, my short thing is you got plenty of flexibility in the TRIPS agreement already right now. The problem is not the flexibility doesn't exist. It's just the will to use the flexibility seems to be lacking. If you want to know what you can do, just look what the US did in 2020 and look what the EU is proposing right now. That shows you how far you can go if you really want to do it. And I also, I think Ellen took issue with me a little bit, maybe some comment I made in the chat about Article 39, 2 of the TRIPS agreement. I put in the chat the WTO analytical index thing on Article 39 of the TRIPS, which just has to do with undisclosed information. And one thing people should know is just that Article 39.3 of the TRIPS has this sort of exception in it for to protect the public, where you can disclose certain things, and that doesn't really exist in Article 32. But I think Ellen had a different point, and I don't want to. I respect she's looked at this really hard, so maybe she can sort of explain what that point is, and I'll stop there.
Thanks, Jamie. I see Moga's hand up, and if I know we've had a really rich and robust discussion, and we'll probably want to wrap up soon. But I see that Moga has her hand up, so please go ahead, Moga. And yeah.
Just very quickly on your first question, Priti, and you know that very well. It's not a technical position, or it's not a technical fix to break that divide. It's a political will, as we know that, or as we hope developing countries are sticking together in their position on these things. on these issues. Meantime, of course, the rich countries, as we know, are also not wanting to give in, not wanting any mandatory language, but they just can't rule the world. And we see that in the political environment right now. I just somehow can't really, I see it as one thing, you know, that rich countries want to do something, they will do it, and just don't seem to really, seem to just give good words to low middle income countries, and that's not good enough. So I think there is the developing countries must stick together and push for this, for good mandatory language on some of the issues we're talking about, and don't accept we will do this. Don't accept a document that is just would not help in the future. And I think the litmus test for a successful accord is try to implement it on a health crisis and see if it works. If it works on a monkeypox, for example, then it's a good one. If it doesn't work and DRC doesn't get the product, except despite they having a more lethal variant than what we have in Europe, then it doesn't work.
Thank you, Moga. Especially thanks for bringing that very clear litmus test, for these discussions. Ellen, I see your hand raised. Over to you.
Yeah, thank you. Just very quickly in response to Jamie's comment on 39.2, what we've tried to point out in the briefing paper, which accompanies proposals for tax, is that 39.2, I think it's important for people to understand that there's no barrier in the TRIPS agreement for such a provision in the pandemic agreement with regard to trade secrets. 39.3 has a clear clause, but there are other trade secrets that may not be covered on the 39.3. They're on the 39.2, and that is those secrets need to be protected against unfair commercial use. But the use of that information in a pandemic, of course, does not fall under the category of unfair commercial use. So for those of you who want to know more, I would really recommend reading the brief. It is a brief. It's only 2 pages, but it might be useful background information in the negotiations. Over.
Hey, Ellen, can I just follow up on this? Like, for unfair commercial use, if compensation is involved, well, in Article 44 of the TRIPS, if you eliminate the availability to get an injunction, you can eliminate the availability to get an injunction if you provide compensation or remuneration. I think for trade secrets, you overcome some of the problems. I think you're right. You can do it even without compensation, but it's sort of easier to do in some legal systems if there is some compensation. And I don't think compensation at a reasonable level is really a bad thing.
I fully agree with you. And of course, if entities that hold that information are willing to enter in such agreements, then that's fine. But this is very much aimed at a situation where that is not the case, and give countries the opportunity to intervene, to reach in. And it may also, I know we're short of time, but the other point I was trying to make, the issue of governments retaining rights in government-funded innovation will be a very, very important. There is this reference in the text about licensing government rights, but governments might also want to commit to retain certain rights so they can actually keep greater control over. And again, thank you very much for organizing this. This was really very, very interesting and helpful.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you, Ellen. And I think we'll wrap up soon, but just to say, I wanted to thank all of the participants who not only spoke, but also participated in the chat. And I would like to also, we were honored to have the presence of one of the co-chair of the INB, Madame Precious Matsoso. And if you would like, Madame Matsoso Precious, please, over to you. Thank you.
No, thank you very much for inviting me, and I listened with much interest to all of you, and I think I just want to start by picking up on what Morga said, the litmus test. I mean, if this accord really works, we should actually test it with what already confronts us. Then we'll know that it's a good one. It's a good agreement. And if it doesn't, then we should actually not even spend so much energy crafting a language that is not going to be helpful, especially because most of the people in this discussion, most of all of you who spoke, you've traveled this journey. I mean, we've been at this journey on access on all these provisions for years, and I'm hoping that this time around, I mean, starting with R&D treaty, de-linkage, PPPs of pull, push, and pull. I can recite all of these things that we've been fighting for all these years, and I'm hoping that this time around we'll get it right, and it will be the ultimate, and we're not gonna have another round again because this time it came at a cost. We counted the number of people who died. We counted the number of people. Of course, we've done it with HIV and AIDS, but this time around, I think it hit hard, and none of us can say we are not affected, and at least we are survivors. We can do something about it. So with all of this, I'm quite hopeful because at least at this coming INB 7, you will be in the room. You're not going to make your statements online. You're going to make your statements in the room. You're going to be in the precinct. You'll be able to engage with member states. I think it's a significant development, which I hope will ease things out for member states to understand. And I'm happy that you've also brought information about developments in other regions that others should know about, which may facilitate discussions and negotiations when they propose text. Of course, we want to make this to be as productive as possible, but as always, your contribution is valuable, and member states can rely on the expertise that you bring, and now that will be closer to the process, and you'll be in the room. I think it will help us a lot. Thank you very much again for inviting me.
Thank you so much, Precious, and thank you for these encouraging words, and also, in terms of, for some of us to clarify these modalities for the upcoming 7th session of the Intergovernmental Negotiating Body, which will take place next week. And with that, I'll hand over to Jamie to close this off. Jamie, you're on mute.
I think Through has done his concluding comments are fine. I just thank everyone for 2 hours of your life talking about these things. I think we'll try and schedule another call or two where we try and take a deep dive on like narrow things, because I think it's useful. But thanks. I think we can all go back and take care of our day jobs now.
Thank you all. Over. Bye.
Thank you,
Bye.
Thierry. Thank you.